What if the moment Harry finally understood Dumbledore wasn't heartwarming at all, but absolutely horrifying? Let's start with the White Void. No wands, no Death Eaters, no Hogwarts. Just Harry, that endless King's Cross limbo, and something small and broken screaming under a bench. That thing, that flayed, gasping, almost baby creature. That's the piece of Voldemort's soul that had been riding shotgun in Harry's head since Godric's Hollow. And Dumbledore is standing there, like they've just bumped into each other at Flourish and Blotts. Calm, gentle, weirdly cheerful for a guy explaining why his favorite student had to die. Listen to how he talks here. No panic, no guilt, no, wow, sorry I parked you with an actual torture family for 17 years. He simply walks Harry through the logistics of his death, like this is one more chess move in a game he's been quietly winning for decades. Because it is. If you're wondering when Dumbledore becomes a potential villain, it's this conversation. Right here. When he finally admits what he's known for years, Harry was a Horcrux. The boy who lived was actually the boy who needed to die on schedule. And then we get the line. The one fandom loves to quote like it's tragic poetry, when it's actually nightmare fuel. Dumbledore tells Snape he's been raising Harry as a pig for slaughter. Yeah. Take a moment. That's not Voldemort talking. That's not Bellatrix on a bad day. That's the kindly old headmaster, the lemon drop grandpa of the wizarding world, describing the kid he left on a doorstep. In King's Cross, Harry finally connects it. Every year at Hogwarts, every mystery Dumbledore dangled, every time he said not yet when Harry begged for the truth. It wasn't random. It wasn't just eccentric mentor vibes. It was training, conditioning. A long game Harry never agreed to play, designed to walk him, step by step, to this exact moment where he'd willingly lay down his life. Look, nobody was surprised that Dumbledore had secrets. But the scale of it, the way this scene usually gets read as tender closure, wise old wizard explaining everything at last while Harry nods bravely? Watch it again with this in mind. Dumbledore is explaining the plan after the fact, when Harry's already dead, already committed, and has literally no real choices left. That's not closure. That's the ultimate gaslight. Dumbledore gets to frame the narrative, justify the years of manipulation, wrap it all in destiny and love, while quietly skipping over the parts where he gambled a child's life a dozen times to get here. And Harry, because he's Harry, forgives him. But what if you don't? What if Voldemort was the monster, and Dumbledore was the one writing the script? Stay with us, because we're about to trace that script from baby Harry on the doorstep to the post-war propaganda machine that kept Dumbledore's halo perfectly polished. So let's actually say the quiet part out loud. What if the greatest dark wizard Harry ever faced wasn't Voldemort at all? What if the real final boss was Albus Lemon Drop Dumbledore, the man who decided where Harry slept, what he remembered, and the exact day he was allowed to die for the plot? That's the premise, not Dumbledore was secretly a Death Eater in a fake beard. We're not doing crack fanfic. We're doing a moral re-evaluation of a man who openly admits he was once obsessed with the greater good, and then spends the rest of his life quietly arranging the entire wizarding world like his personal chessboard. If you're wondering how far back this goes, it's not just first year. It's Grindelwald. It's Godric's Hollow. It's the moment he looks at a war-torn world and decides, apparently, that the only safe hands for ultimate power are his. Let's start with scope, because this isn't just Dumbledore was kind of sketchy with Harry. We're tracking the long game from teenage Dumbledore writing manifestos with Grindelwald to Professor Dumbledore visiting Tom Riddle in the orphanage and basically speed-running his villain origin story to Headmaster Dumbledore dropping baby Harry on the Dursleys' abusive doorstep and calling it love. Then we're following him straight through the Snape arrangement, the Elder Wand unhinged scavenger hunt, and into a post-war ministry that still runs on Dumbledore's narrative even when he's a portrait. Look, nobody was surprised that Voldemort wanted power. The man literally split his soul like it was a loyalty card. But Dumbledore, he wanted something sneakier, control of information. Who knows about Horcruxes? Who learns about the Hallows? Who gets told they have to die? And who gets told they're safe at Hogwarts while he's stockpiling child soldiers? Harry doesn't survive because Dumbledore loves him like a grandson. He survives because Dumbledore needs his living, then dying, then living again body to solve the Elder Wand problem and finish Voldemort on schedule. And Snape? Oh, we're absolutely going there. Dumbledore turns the most miserable man in Britain into the world's saddest middle manager, answering to Voldemort, answering to Dumbledore, answering to his own guilt, while everyone else just thinks he's a greasy bat. Dumbledore literally schedules his murder for maximum wand allegiance efficiency. Romantic, right? We're also going to talk about that wand, the unbeatable Elder Wand that moves from Grindelwald to Dumbledore to Draco to Harry in this ridiculous trail of disarms and planned deaths that, if you've been paying attention, looks a lot less like fate and a lot more like one old man trying to rig the endgame. And after the war? We'll get to that later, but the Ministry, Hogwarts, the history books, they all quietly lock in Dumbledore's version of events. The abuse, the lies, the body count, all smoothed into greatest headmaster of our time. Yeah, take a moment. For now, let's celebrate that you're still here, because next we're diving into young Dumbledore and Grindelwald, where the greater good stops being a slogan and starts looking like a threat. So let's start with the part everyone loves to hand-wave away. Young Albus, not the twinkly grandpa, the trapped, furious prodigy in Godric's Hollow, stuck at home with a damaged sister and a broken father, while his own brilliance just rotted. Into that walks Grindelwald, blonde, brilliant, walking chaos with cheekbones. And suddenly, Albus isn't the overburdened nursemaid anymore. He's the co-author of a revolution. Together, they dream up wizard supremacy, global reform, magical rule over Muggles for the greater good. That exact phrase becomes his cheat code, his moral loophole. If you're wondering when Dumbledore learns to wrap selfish desire in noble language, it's here, in that summer of letters and fantasies. Speaking of letters, the infamous one reads like a dark academic fever dream. Albus casually suggests that Muggles can be subjugated for their own good, that wizards should rule because they're better equipped, and that a few regrettable casualties are acceptable for the greater good. He's literally workshopping the idea that people are tools, not lives. Fast forward 50 years and listen to how he talks about Harry's necessary sacrifice, Snape's essential role, even the random students he leaves in a castle that's basically a cursed murder maze. Different war, same math. Sacrifices are fine, if they serve the plan. Then the plan explodes. Ariana dies in that three-way duel, and nobody even knows whose spell killed her. Perfect metaphor, right? 3 boys playing God, 1 girl deads the floor. After that, Dumbledore swears off power. Or so he says. Look, nobody was surprised that he didn't suddenly become a humble background character. He doesn't stop wanting control. He just stops wanting to be seen wanting it. No more open rule with Grindelwald. Instead, he hides inside institutions. Hogwarts, the Order, the Wizengamot. He trades a wand raised in conquest for a desk stacked with paperwork and prophecy. which, if you've been paying attention, explains his favorite move later: secrecy. He withholds information for your own good. Like it's a love language. Harry doesn't get the full Horcrux truth. Snape doesn't get the full Elder Wand truth. The Ministry doesn't get the full Voldemort truth. But Dumbledore, he's quietly arranging who lives, who dies, and when they go, because the timeline in his head matters more than their agency. And here's the unsettling part. He never stops chasing the greater good. He just swaps Grindelwald for Hogwarts, the Ministry, and one very unlucky boy with a lightning scar. Harry becomes the new Ariana, a damaged child he feels guilty over, a living reminder of his own failure, and a convenient centerpiece for his redemption project. Yeah, take a moment, because once you see Harry as Ariana 2.0 in Dumbledore's mind, every kindly decision hits different. And we haven't even talked about how he scripts Snape's death or choreographs the Elder Wand's loyalty trail. We'll get to that later, when the body count starts looking like a strategy chart. So, if Harry is Ariana 2.0 in Dumbledore's head, who was Prototype 0? Let's start with the creepiest job interview in Wizarding World history. Dumbledore walking into Wool's orphanage to meet 11-year-old Tom Riddle. This kid is already a walking red flag factory. He's stealing other children's things, hurting them, hanging on to trophies like a tiny serial killer in training. And Dumbledore, he doesn't walk in like Hagrid with rock cakes and chaotic hugs. He walks in like an investigator, cold, controlled. Testing Tom instead of comforting him, poking at his temper, deliberately provoking the magic to see what happens. If you're wondering when Tom learns that adults are threats to outsmart instead of people to trust, that room is a pretty good candidate. Dumbledore clocks the danger instantly. He literally leaves that meeting knowing, in his own words later, that Tom liked to hurt. And then, he just leaves him there. In a grim, loveless Muggle institution with zero follow-up for another month. No visits. No letters. No, hey, here's a friendly face from the only world that will ever accept you. It's like telling a starving kid, there's a feast with your name on it, and then locking the door while you go do paperwork. What does that teach Tom? Magic is real. You're special. But the one powerful wizard you've met will abandon you back in the place you hate. Alone. Unwanted. Again. That's gasoline on his hole. I can only rely on myself. I must never be weak. Complex, which, if you've been paying attention, is Voldemort's entire personality. Fast forward to Hogwarts. Tom arrives, charming, brilliant, immediately beloved by teachers who are not named Albus. He becomes a prefect, wins awards for special services, collects admiration like other people collect chocolate frog cards. Everyone falls for it, except Dumbledore. And instead of stepping in as the one adult who sees through the mask and actually mentoring the kid, he just watches, keeps his distance, keeps Tom at arm's length like he's already a suspect. Imagine being the hyper-aware, trauma-baked orphan who finally finds power and praise, and the only person who knows your real darkness refuses to offer any emotional connection. That distance doesn't stop Tom. It dares him. It feeds his obsession with control, with immortality, with never again being the scared boy in the orphanage waiting for someone who doesn't come back. Then you get the sequel. Tom Riddle's actual job interview from hell. Adult Tom walks into Dumbledore's office asking for the defense against the dark arts position. Dumbledore knows about the diary. He suspects the murders. He can feel the Horcrux stink in the room. And what does he do? He says no, and then lets Tom walk out. No attempt to detain him. No public warning to the Ministry. No. By the way, our star alumnus is probably building murder soul jars in his spare time. He protects Hogwarts' image, keeps the scandal quiet, and Voldemort strolls off to go full supervillain. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. The irony? Dumbledore spends the rest of his life fighting Voldemort, but his early choices basically curated the museum exhibit labeled How to Make a Dark Lord. And this is not the last time he manufactures his own enemy, because once we get to Snape, the Elder Wand, and that very scheduled death on the astronomy tower. Yeah, take a moment. We'll get to that later, when Dumbledore starts treating human lives like chess pieces, and you realize Tom Riddle was just his first failed experiment. So if Dumbledore literally handcrafted Tom Riddle, what do you do for an encore? Apparently, you go even younger. You pick up a 1-year-old and speedrun the Create Your Own Weapon challenge. Let's start with the night at Godric's Hollow. Voldemort is gone, the house is destroyed, and Dumbledore suddenly has the most famous orphan in the wizarding world on his hands. And this is crucial. He has options. The Weasleys exist. The Longbottoms' extended family exists. There are Order members with spare bedrooms, actual parenting skills, and zero hatred of magic. He could have tucked Harry into a world where people know what a broom is. Instead, he chooses the Dursleys, the couple who slammed the door on Lily's magic years ago, the man who calls wizards freaks, the woman who weaponizes her neck to look down on literally everyone. Out of all the possibilities, Dumbledore picks the one house guaranteed to treat Harry like radioactive trash. If you're wondering how he sold that to himself, we get the blood protection speech, Lily's sacrifice, Petunia's shared blood, ancient wards that keep Voldemort and his fan club from turning Privet Drive into a murder cul-de-sac. And yeah, the magic is real. But look at what he never does. He never seriously explores magical guardianship that keeps those wards while also providing, basic human decency. No discussion of rotating guardians. No long-term Hogwarts protections. No, hey, maybe Remus can be nearby and make sure the kid isn't sleeping in a cupboard. Nothing. And Dumbledore knows. This is not ignorance. He jokes about the Dursleys' hospitality in that first book like it's a sitcom bit, while Harry literally lives under the stairs. Mrs. Fig is in the neighborhood, filing reports, dragging Harry through cat photo tours so Dumbledore can keep tabs. By the time he shows up in Half-Blood Prince and casually calls out their abuse at the kitchen table, it's not a revelation. It's confirmation that he's known for years and done exactly zero to stop it. Why leave him there for a decade? Because an isolated, unloved child is easy to shape. Harry arrives at Hogwarts so starved for affection, he imprints on the first adult, who offers him lemon drops and a twinkle. Dumbledore is kind, mysterious, all-knowing, and most importantly, not Vernon. Of course, Harry trusts him. Of course he will walk into danger when that man says, "I'm afraid I must ask too much of you," which, if you've been paying attention, is the point. A confident, well-loved Harry raised by the Weasleys might question orders, push back, demand answers. The Harry we get? He keeps forgiving secrets, moving toward the slaughterhouse with loyalty pre-installed. So you have to ask, did Dumbledore simply tolerate Harry's suffering, or quietly find it useful? Because this pain makes you obedient pattern doesn't stop with a boy on a doorstep. Once we get to Snape, the double life, and that scheduled death on the astronomy tower. Yeah, take a moment. The abuse stops being collateral damage and starts looking like a feature. So if pain was the onboarding process, Hogwarts was the actual contract, and Harry signs it in crayon. Let's start with where Harry is right before that letter shows up. Cupboard under the stairs. No friends. Bullied at school. starved for attention, affection, and literally basic information about who he is. His life is one long, low-budget misery montage, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly the kind of kid who will cling to the first adult that says, "You matter." Enter Hagrid. Not just any recruiter. Dumbledore sends the gentlest half-giant in existence, with a pink umbrella, a squashed birthday cake, and the emotional energy of a golden retriever in a moleskin coat. This is not random. This is brand strategy. Your first contact with the wizarding world is a fairy tale rescue on a rock in the sea, complete with door smashing and "You're a wizard, Harry." And whose idea was it to send Hagrid? Dumbledore's. The same man who could have sent McGonagall, an Auror, literally anyone with a functioning sense of boundaries. Instead, he picks the one person Harry will never, ever see as threatening. So every time Harry remembers the night his life was saved from the Dursleys, the credit line quietly reads, "Approved by Albus Dumbledore." Then Dumbledore stays off stage. Smart move. Harry spends a whole train ride and boat ride hearing legends about this mysterious, all-powerful headmaster who defeated Grindelwald and hired a guy who brings live spiders to class. By the time Harry actually sees him, it's in the Great Hall, candles floating, ceiling enchanted, everyone staring at the boy who lived. Dumbledore gives a goofy little speech about not going into the forest because it's full of certain death, tosses in some nonsense words, and still somehow radiates, "I know everything about you, and you're safe now." He already knows Harry's name, his parents, his scar, his house potential. For a kid who's been treated like an unwanted package, that kind of instant, all-knowing attention hits like a drug. And Hogwarts itself? Designed to keep Harry orbiting Dumbledore forever. The House Cup drama in first year is a masterclass. Harry breaks rules, almost dies multiple times, and at the end, Dumbledore strolls in and casually rewrites the scoreboard in front of the entire school. Rule breaking, when it serves the headmaster's secret objectives, gets you standing ovations and a pile of points. Same year, we've got the Philosopher's Stone situation, a supposedly protected artifact guarded by teachers who all conveniently design obstacles perfectly calibrated to 3 first-year's skill sets. If you're wondering why a literal child ends up facing Voldemort in a turban instead of, say, an adult professor, you're starting to see the pattern. So that Hogwarts letter? It reads like, "Welcome to school." But functionally, it's, "Welcome to the army. Training starts now." And the stone is just Dumbledore's opening move in active manipulation. You think the first year is bad? Wait until we get to the chamber, the tournament, and the year he lets Umbridge in on purpose. Yeah. Take a moment. So let's start with the wildest part of first year that everyone kind of shrugs off. Dumbledore brings an object that literally grants immortality and unlimited gold into a boarding school full of 11-year-olds. Not a vault, not a secure ministry bunker, a castle where the staircases move for fun and the poltergeist is a war crime. And then, the second the threat level spikes, he leaves. He gets called away, right when Hagrid has accidentally told a stranger in a pub how to get past Fluffy, when someone is clearly going after the stone, and when Harry has already been nearly yeeted off his broom by a cursed spell. If you're wondering why the greatest wizard of the age chose that moment to be unreachable, the answer in this theory is simple. He wanted to see what Harry would do without adult backup. Because look at how the protections are built. It's not a serious security system. It's an after-school club obstacle course, devil's snare that needs herbology and calm logic, a room of flying keys that requires Oh wow, a Seeker-level flyer. A life-sized wizard chess set for Ron, a potions logic puzzle for Hermione, and a final face-off that only someone with Harry's specific love protection can survive. Which, if you've been paying attention, doesn't look like coincidence. It looks like a tailored exam paper. This isn't Dumbledore trying to keep kids out. This is Dumbledore betting that these 3 specific kids will go in. He knows they're curious, loyal, and already obsessed with stopping Snape. He's watching to see, will they break rules for the greater good? Will they put themselves between danger and the rest of the school? And how far will Harry go when nobody is coming to save him? Now layer on what Dumbledore is choosing not to say. He knows from almost the beginning that Quirrell is compromised. By Halloween, he has a troll in the dungeon and a professor smelling like Voldemort's emotional baggage. By Christmas, he has every reason to suspect the Dark Lord is literally living on the back of this man's head. Does he tell Harry? No. Does he tell McGonagall? Apparently not in any way that stops her from sending the trio back to their dorms with a stern look and 0 Aurors. Information is a safety tool. Dumbledore locks it away because the experiment only works if Harry walks in half-blind. Then we get the hospital wing conversation. Harry has just been choked by his possessed teacher, seen his dead parents in a mirror, and technically died for a few seconds. Dumbledore's response? Glowing praise. He frames the whole thing as noble, inevitable, even kind of beautiful. You did well. You were protected by love. You were very brave. No serious apology. No. Hey, I knowingly left you in the blast radius of my secret war. Just a gentle nudge that this is what heroes do. That's the real lesson of first year. Risking your life for the cause is not just acceptable, it's celebrated. You get house points, hospital chocolate, and the headmaster's personal approval. And once Dumbledore sees that Harry will walk into the dark for people he barely knows, the weapon is viable. First year is the pilot episode. Chamber of Secrets is where he renews the show for a much darker second season. And the way he lets that basilisk situation unfold? Yeah, we'll get to that later. Chamber of Secrets is where the stakes go from fun-haunted school to murder snake in the plumbing, and Dumbledore still treats it like a character-building side quest. Kids are being petrified. A basilisk is literally joyriding through the pipes. And what does the greatest wizard of the age do? Vague encouragement. Cryptic eye twinkles. Absolutely 0. Hey, maybe we shut the castle and hunt the giant death reptile. Let's start with the basics. He knows there's a monster. He knows it's Slytherin-related. He knows Harry is hearing voices in the walls that nobody else can hear. In a school where the portraits gossip, the ghosts eavesdrop, and the headmaster has a front-row seat to everything, you're telling me he doesn't connect mysterious voice, plus students turn to stone, plus ancient Slytherin bathroom tunnel? If you're wondering, no, he never sits Harry down to say, "You speak snake. That's rare, dangerous, and extremely relevant right now." Instead, he lets a 12-year-old walk around thinking he might be the heir of Slytherin while the actual heir's murder diary is running a side hustle in emotional manipulation. This is not ignorance. Dumbledore already knows about Parseltongue. He was the one who clocked it in the first book when Harry chatted up a boa constrictor like it was a house pet, which, if you've been paying attention, makes his silence during chamber feel a lot less like caution and a lot more like an experiment. And then there's Lockhart, the walking hair commercial, the man whose CV is basically, "I stole other people's homework." Any competent background check, any quick flu call to an actual curse breaker, and Lockhart's whole brand collapses. Dumbledore hires him to teach defense against the dark arts anyway, during a year when a dark creature is literally hunting students. The result? When things go bad, the adult in charge of defense is useless, cowardly, and memory charms himself into permanent confusion, forcing the kids to step up. Again. Here's the pattern interrupt: the diary. That creepy little notebook is not just a plot device, it is Dumbledore's golden ticket. After Ginny, Harry, and the Basilisk showdown, he finally gets confirmation that Voldemort anchored pieces of his soul to objects. He sees Tom Riddle preserved in a diary, watches it die when the fang goes through, and you can practically hear the gears turning. Horcruxes. Multiple. Method confirmed. Does he tell Harry any of this? Of course not. He files it away, starts his secret Horcrux research project, and lets Harry walk into 3 more years of escalating danger with no idea what he actually destroyed under the school. The chamber incident becomes data collection, not a warning label. Congrats on surviving the snake, Harry. I'll be using that information to plan your future death. And after Harry almost dies again, what does he get? A pat on the head, some house points, warm grandfatherly approval. Another brick in the wall of, your suffering is worth it for the greater good. The basilisk is gone, the diary is gone, but Dumbledore's long game? Very much alive, because next year he's not just risking Harry's life, he's gambling with his soul. The prophecy, the graveyard, the whole raised to die arc? Yeah, take a moment. We're about to go there. The prophecy is where Dumbledore stops being a quirky chess grandpa and starts looking like a narrative control freak. Let's start with what it actually says. Trelawney, during her job interview, goes full blackout oracle and predicts that a child born at the end of July will have the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, that the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, and that neither can live while the other survives. Snape overhears half, runs to Voldemort. Voldemort runs to Godric's Hollow, and the whole story locks into place. Except it didn't have to. That's the point. Dumbledore gets this prophecy secondhand, then as an actual glass ball in the Department of Mysteries, and instead of treating it like a giant red flag saying, maybe don't involve babies in your war, he builds his entire strategy around it. He doesn't destroy the record. He doesn't bury it. He guards it like it's the script of the universe. Because if you're wondering when Harry stops being a child and starts being a weapon, it's here. He could have treated it as a warning. Voldemort is coming for a child. Protect the families. Shut this down. Instead, he leans into it. He lets Voldemort mark him as his equal. He knows, after the fact, that Harry is carrying a piece of Voldemort's soul and still raises him as the chosen one who must eventually die to finish the job. That's not destiny. That's a choice. And Harry doesn't even get the full script. For years, Dumbledore drip-feeds him information like it's a subscription service. By order of the Phoenix, Harry finally hears the big line. Neither can live while the other survives. But notice what Dumbledore does not say. He doesn't explain the Horcrux inside Harry. He doesn't spell out, you will have to let Voldemort kill you. He waits until it's too late to back out, until Harry is already hunted, already committed, already emotionally incapable of saying no. Then we hit that office scene in Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore admits he's been avoiding Harry for an entire year, not because he didn't know what was going on, because he did, because getting too close to the boy he was raising to die made him feel guilty, which, if you've been paying attention, is not a lack of information problem. It's a conscience problem. Look, nobody was surprised that Voldemort wanted immortality. That's his whole brand. But Dumbledore, He wants the prophecy to play out clean. One dead Dark Lord, one dead boy hero, the wizarding world saved by a neat, tragic sacrifice he can frame as the greater good. It's morally tidy, cinematic, almost elegant. And then, at the last second, he cheats even that ending. Because Dumbledore doesn't just direct the prophecy. He also rewrites the final scene using Horcrux lore, wand allegiance, and one very confused resurrection stone. We'll get to that later. Because if Dumbledore's rewriting the ending, he's also editing everything that comes before it. And third year is where he stops being the kindly grandpa and starts feeling a lot more like a showrunner with a god complex. Let's start with Sirius. On paper, he's the traitor best friend who blew up a street and betrayed the Potters. In reality, Dumbledore knows this story has holes. He knows Sirius was James's secret keeper candidate, knows they switched to Pettigrew, knows Pettigrew's body was never actually found, and knows the supposed mass murderer was tossed into Azkaban without a trial. And he just never pushes it, never reopens the case, never even warns Harry that the Ministry might have railroaded his parents' best friend. So Harry grows up hating his innocent godfather. Perfect. Because a godfather who loves you, who can tell you what your parents were really like, who can give you a home that isn't a cupboard under the stairs. That's dangerous. That's emotional stability. That's a support system that isn't named Albus. And while we're on emotional stability, let's talk about the Dementors, the wizarding world's favorite depression fog machines. Dumbledore, reluctantly, allows them to guard Hogwarts because, apparently, Ministry politics matter more than the mental health of a castle full of traumatized kids. He knows Harry's worst memory is his parents' murder. He's the one who literally heard Trelawney predict that murder. And he still lets soul-sucking creatures patrol the Quidditch pitch. If you're wondering, couldn't he have fought harder? Yeah. Take a moment. This is the man who can stare down Fudge, Voldemort, and an entire Wizengamot. But when it comes to Dementors around children, he suddenly discovers the limits of his power. Then we get to the Shrieking Shack. The big reveal. Sirius is innocent. Pettigrew is alive. The entire narrative flips. Dumbledore believes Harry and Hermione enough to authorize a time travel jailbreak that nearly rips open the space-time continuum. But does he then march into the Ministry, slam down an eyewitness account, a live rat animagus, and his own reputation to clear Sirius's name? No. He chooses secrecy, status quo. A fugitive godfather who can never publicly claim Harry. That's not an accident. That's control. A cleared Sirius means Harry has a legal guardian, a home, a voice who can say, actually, James was like this, and here's what really happened with Snape, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly what Dumbledore can't allow, so he keeps the Marauders' history in pieces. Lupin never fully explains the Animagus project. Snape never gets to contextualize his teenage trauma. Harry never hears the full, messy adult version of his parents' lives and deaths. Everyone knows a fragment, and Dumbledore is the only one holding the full picture together in his head. It's his favorite spell, and he doesn't even need a wand. Not obliviate, in the literal sense. He doesn't erase Harry's memories. He just never gives him the memories that matter, keeping him in this permanent, half-informed loyalty loop. Not brainwashed, just underfed, hungry for answers only one person ever seems to have, and that person is the one planning his death. We'll get to that later. And if you're wondering how far he's willing to take that, welcome to the year Dumbledore literally throws a 14-year-old into a murder tournament and calls it education. Let's start with the goblet scene. Harry's name comes out, the room goes silent, and every adult with 2 brain cells knows something is wrong. The age line was broken. Harry didn't enter. This is supposed to be the safest, most regulated event the wizarding world can manage, and it glitches immediately. Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard in the room, walks up, looks at the paper, and instead of saying, "Cool, we're done here," he shrugs and goes, "Magically binding contract. Sorry, kid. Binding. Magical. Contract." The way he says it, you'd think the goblet is the IRS and he's helpless before the paperwork. Except he's Albus Dumbledore. Chief Warlock, Order Leader, Headmaster, the guy who personally dueled Grindelwald. If anyone could challenge, reinterpret, or flat-out ignore the rules to protect a child, it's him. He could have pulled Harry from the school. He could have declared the tournament compromised. He could have forced a ministry inquiry. Instead, he decides the best option is keep the obviously targeted boy in the obviously cursed event and see what happens. And what happens is incredibly convenient. Each task is like a curated hero-building montage. Dragons? Perfect chance to prove Harry's raw courage and flying skill in front of international judges. The lake? Harry publicly risks his life to save not just Ron, but Fleur's sister, broadcasting his willingness to die for others. The maze? A creepy shifting metaphor for leadership under pressure, where Harry literally drags a rival champion toward the cup. These aren't just challenges, they're branding exercises. By the end, Harry isn't just Hogwarts' champion. He's the de facto chosen one of the entire wizarding world, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly the reputation Dumbledore needs him to have. And Dumbledore lets all of this play out with zero real safeguards. No extra wards on the cup. No Order members secretly guarding Harry during the tasks. Nothing to stop Barty Crouch Jr. from turning the Triwizard Cup into a one-way portkey to a graveyard. That graveyard climax? Dumbledore later treats it like a goldmine of intel. He wants every detail about the ritual, about the Death Eaters, about the Priori Incantatem connection between the wands. He uses Harry's trauma as data. But in the moment, Dumbledore had positioned Harry perfectly for that trap, and done almost nothing to prevent it. The portkey plan only works because Dumbledore keeps Harry in the tournament at all costs. So what does that make the Triwizard Tournament in Dumbledore's playbook? A recruitment poster and a stress test. If Harry survives, he emerges battle-hardened, publicly anointed, and emotionally tied to Dumbledore as the only adult who believes him. If he dies, the prophecy still gets its dead boy, Voldemort still fears him, and Dumbledore still controls the story. And this is where you start asking, was that the only time he did it? Or just the most theatrical? Yeah. Take a moment, because the next time Dumbledore lines Harry up for slaughter, he doesn't even need a tournament. Because the next time Dumbledore lines Harry up for slaughter, he doesn't even need a tournament. He just needs silence. Let's start with that summer, after the graveyard. Harry has watched Voldemort resurrect himself, seen Cedric die, been gaslit by the entire wizarding world. And Dumbledore's grand response? Ghost him. No letters, no fire call, no Patronus check-in. Just leave a traumatized 15-year-old stewing at Privet Drive with the Dursleys, who treat him like a radioactive toaster. And Dumbledore knows. He literally tells the Order Harry's safest there, while fully aware his mental state is hanging by a thread. Then, at Grimmauld Place, same deal. Keep Harry in the dark. Cut him out of Order meetings. Let him spiral in a house that feels like a cursed anxiety museum. Responsibility without agency. He's the chosen one, but apparently not chosen for basic information. Look, nobody was surprised Harry starts raging at everyone, picking fights, lashing out. That's not random teen angst. That's a kid whose only authority figure has suddenly vanished emotionally. And here's where it gets nasty. Dumbledore already suspects the mind connection with Voldemort. He knows Harry is basically running an unwanted psychic livestream with the Dark Lord. But instead of sitting him down and saying, "Hey, your brain is a security risk. Let's talk boundaries," he just avoids eye contact. At Hogwarts, it's even weirder. Harry walks in expecting backup, and Dumbledore literally won't look at him. No greeting feast conversation, no office chats, just the world's longest, most painful silent treatment. If you're wondering why Harry clings so hard to occlumency with Snape, it's because Dumbledore refuses to be the adult in the room. He outsources Harry's mental health to the guy whose favorite hobby is verbal evisceration. That silence feeds Voldemort like fertilizer. Every nightmare, every vision of corridors and doors, every flash of Arthur Weasley being attacked? All of it hits harder because Harry has nowhere to put it. No context, no plan, just raw fear and anger. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly what makes him easy to steer toward the Department of Mysteries. Pattern interrupt. Imagine if Dumbledore had just told him, "Voldemort might use your feelings against you." Half that book evaporates. Sirius probably lives. And then we get the office confrontation after Sirius dies. Harry destroys the room, screams, throws things, and Dumbledore finally talks. He admits he kept Harry at arm's length to protect himself from caring too much. Translation: my emotional comfort, your psychological survival. He frames it as tragic, noble self-awareness. But it's still staggering. He left Harry vulnerable to Voldemort because he didn't want to get attached. Yeah? Take a moment. The cruel part? It works. By the end of Order of the Phoenix, Harry is hollowed out, furious, and desperate for someone to finally tell him the truth. And that's exactly the headspace Dumbledore needs for Half-Blood Prince. Now he can drip-feed answers on his terms, in his timing, with no real competition for Harry's trust. For now, let's celebrate nothing, because this is the year Dumbledore stops neglecting Harry, just long enough to finish weaponizing him. So Dumbledore finally steps up in Half-Blood Prince. Private lessons, one-on-one time, mentor and chosen one, together at last. Sounds wholesome, right? Yeah? Take a moment, because this is not Hogwarts office hours. This is the Horcrux internship from hell. Let's start with those pensive sessions. On the surface, it looks like Dumbledore is finally giving Harry what he's begged for since Book 1. Actual information. Tom Riddle's childhood, the ring, the diary, Hokey the house elf, Slughorn's memory. But if you're wondering, wait, is this everything? The answer is absolutely not. These are curated flashbacks, a greatest hits album of Voldemort trauma, handpicked to support one conclusion: Dumbledore's Horcrux theory and, conveniently, Dumbledore's long-term strategy. He doesn't show Harry memories that make Dumbledore look indecisive or guilty about Tom. He doesn't admit, "Hey, I clocked this kid as dangerous at 11 and still let him collect cursed artifacts like Pokémon." The narrative is carefully edited so that Voldemort is the lone architect of evil and Dumbledore is the brilliant detective who finally cracked the code. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly the story Dumbledore needs Harry to believe. Because here's the horror movie twist. While Dumbledore is teaching Harry how to identify, locate, and destroy Horcruxes, he never mentions the one living in the room. He knows. By this point, he's literally told Snape that Harry has to die at the right moment. He has the full prophecy. He has the scar connection. He has the diary, the ring, the locket theory. And still, he looks this 16-year-old in the eye and says, You are the one who has to go on, without explaining that go on means walk calmly into magical-assisted suicide later. No informed consent, just vibes and homework. Then we get the cave mission. The internship goes field trip. Dumbledore brings a teenager into what is obviously a death trap, makes him force-feed torture potion to his already frail headmaster, and then expects him to handle whatever nightmare comes out of the lake. Harry's job description that night: water boy, bodyguard, and emotional support child. And during all of this, Dumbledore still withholds the actual endgame. No, you're a Horcrux. Here's what that means. Just, Harry, you must obey me, whatever happens. That's not mentorship. That's programming. These lessons also lock in Dumbledore as the sole authority on Voldemort. Every memory, every theory, every "I think he did this because" positions Dumbledore as the only person who really understands the Dark Lord. So when he dies on that tower, Harry isn't just grieving a teacher. He's grieving his only supposed source of truth, which makes him feel morally obligated to follow the breadcrumbs in that snitch and those cursed textbooks. And Dumbledore's not done, because the final piece of this internship, turning his own murder into a power transfer mechanic. The Elder Wand, Draco, Snape, Harry. One long-rigged ownership chain. We'll get to that later, when Dumbledore's grand exit makes Voldemort look almost straightforward. So let's start with the stick that launched 1,000 bad decisions. The Elder Wand. Supposedly Death's own party favor, passed from wizard to wizard in a bloody relay race of murder and ego. You get Antioch Peverell, you get centuries of duels, you get Grindelwald turning it into his fascist support wand. Standard cursed artifact behavior. Then Dumbledore walks in. He defeats Grindelwald in 1945, takes the wand, and just keeps it. For decades, the most powerful wand in the wizarding world, sitting in the hand of the guy running Hogwarts, the Order of the Phoenix, and basically the moral PR department of Britain. And if you're wondering how many people he tells about this, 0. Not McGonagall, not Moody, not even the Inner Circle Order members. He just quietly dual wields kindly old headmaster and secret death stick owner, like that's a normal Tuesday. Dumbledore's official plan is very noble sounding. He wants to die undefeated, so the Elder Wand's power will die with him. No final duel, no dramatic defeat, just a nice, clean expiration date. The wand is supposed to become a glorified museum piece in his tomb, while he goes out as St. Albus, patron of not being tempted by power anymore. Promise. Except. Astronomy Tower. Draco Malfoy, sweaty sixth year with a shaky Expelliarmus, disarms the greatest wizard of the age. And that's the moment the Elder Wand quietly flips allegiance. No lightning, no choir, just a cosmic new owner logged in notification. Dumbledore's perfect plan? Broken by a stressed-out teenager who can't even fix a vanishing cabinet properly. Yeah, take a moment. But Dumbledore still goes through with it. He lets Snape kill him anyway, fully knowing the wand no longer answers to him. So what does that do? It paints a giant magical target on Snape's back. Voldemort thinks, the man who killed Dumbledore must have the wand's power. And Dumbledore knows Voldemort will think exactly that. He basically signs Snape up for a future where the Dark Lord is personally obsessed with hunting him for a power he literally doesn't have. Look, nobody was surprised that Dumbledore was ready to die. But setting up Snape as decoy wand master? That's not mercy. That's asset disposal. And because Dumbledore keeps the Hallows lore and the wand's rules locked up tighter than the Chamber of Secrets, he forces everyone into his script. Voldemort ends up on a doomed scavenger hunt, grave-robbing Dumbledore and torturing wand-makers, while Harry is stuck in this bizarre moral maze where using the Hallows is bad, except when it's exactly what Dumbledore needs him to do. The secrecy isn't about safety, it's about control. Control of information, control of timing, control of who gets to feel guilty about what. By the end, Dumbledore has turned his own corpse into a chess piece. His death scene, his wand buried in that marble box, even his portrait in the headmaster's office, they all keep pushing the plot in directions he designed from beyond the grave, with instructions nobody alive fully understands. And if you think the Elder Wand was the last move in his rigged endgame, wait until you see what he does with Harry's blood, the Resurrection Stone, and that happily ever after. King's Cross moment. Snape is where Dumbledore's plan stops being clever and starts being cruel. If you're wondering what it looks like when a chess piece has feelings, memories, and a favorite classroom to terrorize, it looks like Severus Snape. Let's start with the moment Snape chooses the light. He doesn't walk into Dumbledore's office full of regret and moral clarity. He staggers in after overhearing the prophecy, realizes he's basically signed Lily's death warrant, and begs. Not for the world, not for the child, for Lily. And Dumbledore's response is not, "Of course I'll help." It's, "What will you give me in return?" Yeah, take a moment. Snape's worst night, his rawest grief, gets converted into a lifetime contract. Dumbledore agrees to try to save Lily, then immediately locks Snape into permanent service. Spy on Voldemort, spy on the Order, spy on the kid who will grow up looking exactly like the man you hated and the woman you loved. It's emotional blackmail with extra homework. And Dumbledore doesn't just recruit him, he isolates him. Snape ends up in this engineered no-man's land, where Death Eaters don't fully trust him, the Order doesn't fully trust him, and students think he's one bad day away from turning into a bat. Which, if you've been paying attention, is perfect for Dumbledore. A man with no community has one place left to go for validation: the old puppet master who gave him a second chance. Look, nobody was surprised that Snape became the bitter, greasy middle manager of Hogwarts. He's doing performance reviews for Death Eaters at night and grading Neville's melting cauldrons by day. But Dumbledore keeps tightening the screws. The unbreakable vow with Narcissa? Dumbledore knows about it. Lets it stand. He understands exactly what it means when Snape swears to protect Draco and complete his mission. It means Snape will have to kill Dumbledore, destroy whatever scrap of reputation he has left, and live, briefly, as the man who murdered the only person who believed in him. Pattern interrupt. Dumbledore could have told Snape the full Elder Wand plan. He doesn't. He lets Snape think the murder is just mercy and strategy for Draco, while secretly using that death to break the wand's trail and keep Voldemort chasing the wrong master. No Hallows briefing. No. By the way, you're also a key step in wand algebra. And then, the finale. Dumbledore expects Snape to die on schedule so Voldemort can win the wand from the wrong man. He sends him to his death without ever explaining the blood magic in Harry, the Resurrection Stone, or the King's Cross Gambit. Snape dies believing he failed Lily's son, when actually he's been carrying the crucial memories Dumbledore prepackaged years earlier. Even his redemption arc isn't his. Those memories in the pensive. That's Dumbledore's final directive. Give the boy exactly this angle on you and on me. Snape's entire life, from begging in that office to bleeding out in the boathouse, ends up as one last carefully edited PR reel to make Dumbledore's story work. And if you think Snape is the only one whose love and loyalty get turned into ammunition, wait until you see what Dumbledore does to Harry's childhood, his friendships, and his idea of free will. If Snape is the trailer for Dumbledore's manipulation, the Hallows versus Horcruxes mess is the full feature film. This is where Dumbledore stops being a kindly mentor and starts speedrunning unreliable narrator as a superpower. Let's start with the basics. Horcruxes are Voldemort's murder souvenirs, chunks of soul stapled to random cursed objects. The Deathly Hallows are the Wizarding World's endgame loot: Unbeatable Wand, Invisibility Cloak, Resurrection Stone. One set keeps Voldemort alive. The other set lets you break death and power balance itself. You'd think the kid destined to walk into a killing curse might need the full picture, right? Dumbledore doesn't think so. He drip feeds Horcrux intel like it's a subscription service. Diary, ring, locket. Oh, by the way, your scar is probably one too. We'll get to that later. Every Horcrux clue is framed as sacred homework. Find these, destroy these. Don't ask too many follow-up questions. Meanwhile, Hallows information, buried in a children's story and vibes. If you're wondering how intentional that split is, look at the will. The Deluminator for Ron, the Tales of Beedle, the Bard for Hermione, the Snitch for Harry. 3 objects, 3 Hallows breadcrumbs, 0 actual explanation. No note that says, hey, these are real. Voldemort's chasing the wand. Don't die confused. Just, here's a light switch, a bedtime story, and a ball you once swallowed. Have fun on your unhinged scavenger hunt. The wild part? Dumbledore knows Harry is exactly the kind of person who would be tempted by the Hallows. He literally spent his youth chasing them with Grindelwald. He knows the obsession, the power fantasy, the disaster potential. And instead of sitting Harry down and saying, "Look, this almost destroyed me. Here's what to avoid," he chooses the mystery box route. He's gambling that suffering, guesswork, and camping will somehow push Harry toward the right answer. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly Dumbledore's favorite move. Split the information. Control the framing. Keep Harry locked into the preferred mission. Horcruxes first, existential questions later. Every time Harry starts to fixate on the Hallows symbol, Hermione drags him back to the locket, because that's the only quest they actually understand. Dumbledore engineered that imbalance. He made the Horcrux path concrete and the Hallows path foggy on purpose. And yet, Harry finally unites them anyway. He walks into the forest with the stone, under the cloak, having mastered the Elder Wand without even meaning to. He ends up using both systems together, on his own terms, almost in spite of Dumbledore's obfuscation. Yeah, take a moment. The one time Harry gets the full picture, it's because he dies. Which brings us back to King's Cross, Dumbledore's final info dump, where he casually admits he wanted the Hallows himself and projected his own temptations all over Harry. But even there, he's still editing the story. The real question is, what is he still not saying in that white void? What is he still not saying in that white void? Let's start with the moment Dumbledore's carefully curated silence cashes out, the walk into the forest. Harry leaves King's Cross with one brutal takeaway. He is a Horcrux. To end Voldemort, he has to let Voldemort kill him. No trial run. No second opinion. Just, all right, guess I die now. Cut to the Forbidden Forest, where he slips away from Ron and Hermione without a word, because he honestly believes this is the only way. No explanation. No debate. Just a 17-year-old walking calmly to his own execution like it's homework he forgot to hand in for 7 books. And this is exactly the moment Dumbledore has been engineering since Harry was in nappies. Years of telling him that his mother's love was defined by dying for him. Years of planting that the power he knows not is love, which, if you've been paying attention, always shows up as self-sacrifice. Years of repeating that prophecies come true because people choose to walk into them. Dumbledore spends Harry's entire life teaching him that the highest, purest, most Gryffindor thing you can do is die for other people. So when the time comes, Harry doesn't demand proof. He doesn't say, "Hey, maybe we check if killing Nagini first changes the math." He doesn't grill anyone on whether a Horcrux can be surgically removed or whether the Hallows combo breaks the rules. He walks, quietly, because Dumbledore has trained him to trust the plan even when the plan is, you die on schedule. Look, nobody was surprised that Harry chose the self-sacrificing route. That's been his brand since age 11. But the fact that he never seriously questions it? That's not just personality. That's grooming. This is the kid Dumbledore left with abusive relatives to make him modest, then fed half-truths to for 6 years, then finally dropped the full death mission on after he was already too loyal to walk away. And when Harry finally uses the resurrection stone, who shows up to walk him to his death? His parents. Sirius. Lupin. The emotional support Avengers. But not Dumbledore. The man who architected this entire situation is conspicuously absent from the comfort squad. Apparently, he can micromanage wand allegiance from beyond the grave, but not show up to say, "Hey, sorry I raised you as a lamb for slaughter?" Yeah, take a moment. If you're wondering whether Harry would still have walked into that forest knowing everything from the start, the Horcrux, the Hallows, the Elder Wand ownership trail, ask yourself, would a fully informed Harry have tried to outplay the prophecy instead of surrendering to it? Or did Dumbledore carefully curate his ignorance to guarantee this exact obedient march to death? Keep that question loaded, because the next piece of Dumbledore's plan makes the forest look merciful. Keep that question loaded, because when Harry dies and wakes up in that blinding White King's cross, we're not in heaven. We're in Dumbledore's final boardroom presentation. Clean, quiet, no blood, no screaming friends. Just a perfectly controlled set where the old headmaster can reset the vibes and, once again, own the narrative. Let's start with the setting. It's literally the anti-battle of Hogwarts. No rubble, no bodies, no chaos. Just endless white fog, a train station, and Dumbledore strolling in like your favorite granddad who absolutely did not raise you to be a magical landmine. That peaceful, dreamlike calm. It disarms you. It disarms Harry. Before Harry can even form the sentence, "You planned my death," Dumbledore is already steering the tone, making jokes about his own mistakes, framing everything as a bittersweet necessity. Look, nobody was surprised Dumbledore knew everything. He casually admits he figured out the Horcrux inside Harry, that he always expected Harry to die, and that he deliberately kept him in the dark. But listen to how he does it. Soft voice, regretful eyes, self-deprecating charm turned up to 11. He talks about being unworthy, about his old man's mistakes, about being tempted by the Hallows, like he just forgot to pay a parking ticket, not orchestrated a teenager's murder-suicide mission. And if you're wondering where the real manipulation is, it's in the compliments. Dumbledore keeps telling Harry he is more merciful, more forgiving, more selfless than Dumbledore could ever be. Sounds nice, right? But that flattery is a trap, because the second Harry accepts that identity, better, kinder, nobler, he has to live up to it. The good version of Harry forgives Dumbledore. The good version doesn't interrogate the ethics too hard. The good version nods sadly and says, Yeah, I understand why you did it. Pattern interrupt. What if Harry had gotten angry? Like actually, fully scream in the station angry. Dumbledore gives him zero space for that. Every time the conversation brushes against moral horror, child weaponization, Snape's death, the Hallows obsession, Dumbledore pivots back to Harry's courage, Harry's heart, Harry's choice. He sells Harry on the idea that going back is not just an option, it's the only thing someone as good as Harry could do. Watch how he presents it. Return to life, face Voldemort again, maybe die for real, as something both noble and inevitable. No talk of other metaphysical options. No, you could stay and rest sales pitch. Just a gentle, relentless push toward finishing Dumbledore's plan, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly what he's been doing since the Dursleys' doorstep. By the time Harry boards that not-quite train, the deal is sealed. Dumbledore has confessed just enough to seem honest, flattered Harry into absolution, and framed the next sacrifice as Harry's own free, heroic choice. Even dead, even in limbo, he's still running the story. And Harry walks away loving the man who raised him to die, ready to complete the mission he never actually got to question. Yeah, take a moment. We cut back in with the worst group project debrief of all time. The battle is over. Voldemort is face-planted on the Great Hall floor like discarded homework, and around him, bodies. Fred, Tonks, Remus, Colin. The cost is everywhere. And up on the wall, framed in gold, Dumbledore's portrait is literally smiling down like a very pleased project manager whose risky startup just went public. Let's start with the timing. Minutes before this, Harry has walked through Snape's memories. He's watched Dumbledore calmly plan a teenager's death, bully Snape into promising to look after the boy, and schedule his own murder for maximum Elder Wand efficiency. Harry knows Dumbledore left him in an abusive cupboard. He knows about the calculated secrecy, the Hallows, the Horcrux in his own head. He knows he was raised as a weapon. And what does he do with that information? Nothing. Publicly, at least. He walks back into the Great Hall, breaks the Elder Wand, hugs his friends, and says absolutely zero about the fact that Hogwarts' beloved headmaster spent years grooming him for slaughter. For now, let's celebrate, right? If you're wondering why nobody questions anything, look at the story that immediately locks into place. The official post-war narrative is clean, shiny, and emotionally satisfying. Dumbledore, the wise guiding light. Snape, the tragic double agent who loved Lily. Harry, the destined savior. Voldemort, the pure, uncomplicated monster. It's a myth you can put in a history of magic textbook without giving 11-year-olds an existential crisis. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly the kind of narrative control Dumbledore has always loved. He doesn't just win battles, he wins the syllabus. Notice who doesn't show up after the war. There's no Truth Commission, no Wizengamot hearings titled, "So About the Child Soldiers at Hogwarts." Nobody drags McGonagall or Kingsley into a public forum and asks, "Hey, remember when we let teenagers duel Death Eaters in the corridors while the adults did whatever that was?" The wizarding world holds trials for Umbridge and the Death Eaters. Kingsley reforms Azkaban, kicks out the Dementors, actually tries to fix things. But a formal inquiry into Dumbledore's decisions? The man who orchestrated the Elder Wand trail, weaponized Snape's guilt, and left a baby with people he knew were awful because it fit his blood protection theory. Not even on the table. Look, nobody was surprised. Dumbledore died with perfect timing, a heroic reputation, and a built-in excuse. He's not around to defend himself, so bringing up his war crimes feels rude. And Harry, the only person who could stand up and say, "Hey, maybe this was messed up, spends the rest of his life naming kids after him and Snape. Dumbledore's greatest victory isn't defeating Voldemort. It's building a world where questioning Dumbledore feels like heresy, where the Ministry reforms everything except the myth of its favorite headmaster, and where Hogwarts rebuilds without ever asking why its students had to die in the first place. And when we talk about Kingsley's new Ministry and McGonagall's shiny post-war Hogwarts? Yeah. Take a moment, because you're about to see just how deeply Dumbledore's blueprint is still running the show. So when the dust settles and the bodies are buried, who's actually running this brave new world? Let's start with the obvious face on the chocolate frog card, Kingsley Shacklebolt. Calm voice, perfect robes, the only adult in order meetings who looked like he'd read a management book. Kingsley isn't just some random competent guy who wandered in from human resources. He's Dumbledore's guy, a former order member, personally trusted, deeply loyal to the mission and the inner circle. And when he becomes minister? Look, nobody was surprised. The previous ministers were either corrupt, clueless, or Voldemort's meat puppets. So the wizarding world swings hard in the other direction and picks the chill, moral Auror who literally fought in the Battle of Hogwarts. If you're wondering whether that's a radical revolution or Dumbledore's preferred candidate finally getting the job he wanted him in, yeah, take a moment. Kingsley's early reforms sound incredible on paper. Death Eaters actually prosecuted. Pure-blood bigots finally seeing the inside of Azkaban. Dementors fired, escorted off the premises. No severance package. For centuries, the Ministry's big security idea was, what if depression had wings? And Kingsley just cancels the whole subscription. He improves treatment of Muggle-borns, kills off the blood status registry nonsense, and starts cleaning house. For now, let's celebrate. These are real, tangible wins. But every single one of those moves is straight out of Dumbledore's long-term wish list. Anti-Voldemort, anti-Death Eater, anti-Dementor, pro-Muggle-born. This isn't a new ideology crashing into the Ministry. It's Dumbledore's talking points finally getting pushed through by someone with the keys to the building. And look who's standing next to Kingsley while he does it. Arthur Weasley climbs the ranks. Other Order veterans get promoted. The people in the room where it happens? All Dumbledore's people. The same crowd who spent years taking secret orders from him behind Fudge's back. The faces at the top change, but the worldview sitting in the big chair, that stayed put. What doesn't change is almost more telling than what does. Still one minister with enormous centralized power. Still a single ministry running every part of magical life, from education to law enforcement to international relations. Still zero Muggle representation, no public truth commission, no real accountability mechanism beyond trust the good guys this time. Apparently, the lesson from two magical dictators in a row wasn't, maybe decentralize. It was, pick a better dictator light, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly how Dumbledore liked to operate. Same structures, nicer people in charge, and him or his protégés quietly steering from the center. So the post-war Ministry isn't some brand new system. It's Dumbledore's preferred version of the old one, finally locked in. His allies run it, his enemies are in prison, and his narrative about the war becomes official history. The question is, what happens when Hogwarts itself gets rebuilt under that same story? So what happens when you rebuild Hogwarts under that same story? You put one of Dumbledore's oldest allies in the big chair. Let's start with McGonagall, the tartan, the strict bun, the animagus who will absolutely turn into a cat just to glare at you from a different angle. She steps in as headmistress, and look, nobody was surprised. She's beloved, tough, and actually competent, which, if you've been paying attention, already makes her a radical upgrade from "let children duel a basilisk" Dumbledore. But she's also his closest ideological heir. This is the woman who backed him for decades, defended his choices, and helped run the exact school that turned Harry into a half-trained Horcrux hunter. She's steeped in his philosophy: bravery over caution, personal growth through danger, character forged by near-death experiences. You don't just shake that off because the Board of Governors changes the nameplate on the office door. And Hogwarts? It reopens fast. Like, this was a battlefield 5 minutes ago, fast. After giants, Death Eaters, exploding stone bridges, and a literal body count in the corridors, the official response is basically, repair the walls, scrub off the scorch marks, new term in September. Apparently, nobody in the wizarding world has invented trauma counseling. No mandatory therapy for kids who watch their classmates die. No canon sign of a curriculum overhaul. No serious safety redesign. Just a nicer security situation, because Voldemort is gone and the protective charms are back online. The educational model? Same as it ever was. The house system survives untouched. Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, still competing for points like emotional stability, is awarded in little glass hourglasses. The Quidditch obsession stays front and center, because why not keep a high-speed, bone-breaking sport as the main school pastime after a war about blood purity and power? The culture of competition, house pride, and mild chaos is not a bug. It's a feature Dumbledore cultivated, and McGonagall keeps the software running. And the danger tolerance? Still sky high. Sure, no basilisks in the plumbing anymore, but you're still teaching teenagers to throw curses at each other, brew volatile potions, and fly on barely regulated broomsticks. Rule-bending is still quietly rewarded. The kids who sneak out, form secret clubs, and break curfew to practice advanced magic are the heroes of the last war. And that story is now officially on the syllabus. Because defense against the dark arts finally stabilizes, the curse is gone with Voldemort, so the job stops eating professors for breakfast. But the subject is now taught in a world Dumbledore shaped, using his war as the central moral case study. You're not just learning counter curses, you're learning what Harry did, what Snape did, what Dumbledore planned. His narrative becomes the textbook. So while McGonagall is kinder, more transparent, and significantly less "let's keep 12 secrets at all times," she's still running Dumbledore's Hogwarts, not inventing a new one. The same houses, the same values, the same quiet message that greatness comes from breaking the rules for the right cause. What does that do to the next generation, including Harry's kids, when they grow up inside the legend of the man who manipulated their father? Yeah, take a moment. Because the way those children are taught to see Dumbledore is where this theory goes from unsettling to terrifying. So what happens when those kids grow up inside that legend? They get textbooks. They get history of magic essays. They get the official story. And surprise, in that version, Dumbledore doesn't just come out clean. He comes out glowing. Let's start with how Hogwarts probably teaches the Second Wizarding War 50 years later. Picture Binns, still floating, still boring, droning on about Albus Dumbledore, the wise and benevolent leader of the Resistance. You get the greatest hits reel: Dumbledore's army, the Order of the Phoenix, the lightning-struck tower framed as a tragic but noble sacrifice. Harry is the chosen one, capital C, capital O. Voldemort is pure, flat, cartoon evil. And Snape? The surprise hero who bravely spied for love. Roll credits. Test on Friday. If you're wondering where the messy parts go, spoiler, they don't make the syllabus. Nobody's assigning an essay on Dumbledore deliberately raising Harry for slaughter. Nobody's dissecting how he groomed a traumatized double agent and scheduled his death to fix the Elder Wand problem. That stuff is bad for House Cup morale. Now, technically, the Wizarding world does have a counter-narrative. It's just Rita Skeeter. The life and lies of Albus Dumbledore is sitting in flourish and blots, lurid cover, explosive claims about Grindelwald, Ariana, and the boy who lived in a cupboard. And everybody laughs, because Rita is the pink quill, beetle animagus, chaos gremlin of journalism. Look, nobody was surprised when the public decided her book was just sensationalist gossip. It lets them take anything uncomfortable and file it under tabloid trash instead of, we might need to rethink our national hero. But here's the real problem. The only people who actually know the full story? Harry, Ron, Hermione. The trio who walked through the Hallows, the Horcruxes, the Snape memories, the King's Cross conversation. They could blow up Dumbledore's legacy in a single interview. And they don't. Harry names his kid after him. He gets Dumbledore's chocolate frog card. He works inside the system Dumbledore built. Ron and Hermione back him up by staying quiet. Together, they choose peace over truth. Understandable as humans, catastrophic for historical accuracy. And that sanitized narrative does something really dangerous. It quietly teaches every young witch and wizard that if you're on the good side, the ends kind of justify the means. Manipulate a child. Keep life or death secrets. Use people like chess pieces. Totally fine, as long as you cry about it later and win the war. Dumbledore-style manipulation becomes not a cautionary tale, but a crisis management strategy, which, if you've been paying attention, is Dumbledore's final victory. He doesn't just win the war, he wins the edit. He arranges things so that even the people who could challenge the story choose not to. The boy he raised to die ends up defending his name. The world he controlled keeps teaching his methods as heroism. Yeah, take a moment. Because if the official story is this curated, what else did he script that nobody's questioning yet? So if the official story is that curated, you have to ask the uncomfortable follow-up. What happens to the boy at the center of it once the war is over? Let's start with Harry's career glow-up that feels weirdly like Dumbledore's posthumous LinkedIn plan. Harry does not sit any at duties at all. The kid who barely scraped through potions suddenly walks into the Auror office like, "Hi, I killed Voldemort," and the Ministry just waves him in. Kingsley's in charge now, the reformed, reasonable adult in the room, and he fast-tracks Harry, Ron, and a tiny squad of war heroes straight into law enforcement. No formal qualifications, no standardized testing, just vibes and battlefield experience. Look, nobody was surprised. If you're wondering who ends up running that entire department by 26, it's Harry. The chosen one becomes the chosen bureaucrat. On paper, this is great. The Wizarding world replaces corrupt, torture-happy Aurors with the guy who literally used Expelliarmus as a personality trait. Harry values mercy, hates Dementors, and understands what it's like to be targeted by the state. But he was also trained, from 11 onward, to break rules whenever the moral math felt right. Dumbledore spent years telling him, "You must choose between what is right and what is easy," while quietly nudging him to ignore school rules, ministry decrees, and occasionally common sense whenever it served the bigger mission. So post-war Harry as an Auror? He's that same kid, just with a badge. He'll follow the law until his gut says the law is wrong. He'll give Draco a second chance because he saw him crying in a bathroom. He'll advocate for Snape's portrait because he knows the secret backstory. He decides who's redeemable based on personal knowledge, not judicial process, which, if you've been paying attention, is very Dumbledore. And here's the wild part. He does all this inside the exact ministry structure Dumbledore spent decades calling flawed, corrupt, and easily controlled. Dumbledore manipulated the Wizengamot, leaked information to the press, and ran a shadow organization because he didn't trust the system. Harry? He joins the system. He doesn't push for radical decentralization of power or some magical democracy revolution. He just tries to make the existing machine kinder from the inside. But he's not just another civil servant. Harry has absurd soft power. The boy who lived. The chosen one. The guy on the chocolate frog card. Dumbledore's carefully edited narrative turns Harry into a living moral compass. So when Head Auror Potter thinks someone's dangerous, are you really picturing a lot of people arguing? When he decides a Death Eater kid is genuinely reformed, that opinion probably becomes policy. So we end up with this question. Did Harry, without meaning to, become the new, benevolent manipulator? Less secretive, more emotionally honest, but still one heroic figure whose judgment quietly shapes the wizarding world. And if Dumbledore set the stage for that, what other pieces did he arrange so the game would keep playing without him? So if Harry's quietly becoming Dumbledore 2.0 with a guilt complex, who's backing him up? Look, nobody was surprised. It's the other 2/3 of the Golden Trio, sliding straight into the exact roles Dumbledore needed to lock in his legacy. Let's start with Hermione. The girl who founded SPIW in a common room with 0 members ends up walking into the actual ministry and saying, "Hi, I'd like to fix your entire species hierarchy." She starts in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, which, if you've been paying attention, is the same place that spent decades legally classifying house elves as happy appliances. Hermione walks into that mess and begins pushing for house elf rights, werewolf protections, and actual standards for how the wizarding world treats anything that isn't a pure blood with a vault at Gringotts. On paper, that's Dumbledore's dream. Protect the vulnerable, defend Muggle-borns, stop the blood purists from running the place like a private club. She later moves up into high-level ministry roles, working on Muggle-born protections and anti-corruption measures. In some continuities, she finally becomes Minister for Magic. And yeah. Take a moment. The 11-year-old who punched Draco in the ego with facts is suddenly the one writing the laws. But here's the catch. She's doing it all inside the same centralized ministry structure Dumbledore never actually tried to dismantle. She reforms it, cleanses it, detoxes it. She doesn't replace it. If you're wondering where Ron fits into this, he does the other half of the Dumbledore playbook. Force plus vibes. After the war, he briefly joins Harry in the Auror office. The kid who used to forget his homework is now legally allowed to chase dark wizards with a wand and paperwork. But Ron eventually steps away, ending up at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes with George. That sounds like a downgrade until you realize joke shops in this world sell literal weapons-grade prank items and shape youth culture more than any Daily Prophet editorial ever could. And Ron's not just some random shop guy, he's a Weasley. The family that housed Harry, fed the Order, and basically served as Dumbledore's emotional support network for a decade. Their home was headquarters. Their dad worked at the ministry. Their brother died in the Battle of Hogwarts. That family is welded to the new status quo, and Ron's part of the friendly, chaotic, everything's fine now face of it. Put it together. Harry runs law enforcement energy, Hermione steers policy, Ron shapes culture, and normalizes the post-war order. Dumbledore's 3 favorite students don't just survive, They end up running the board from different angles. The result is a feedback loop. They build a world that treats Dumbledore's approach, secretive plans, strong central ministry, one heroic leader calling the shots, as the gold standard of good wizard leadership. And the more that world works, the more nobody ever questions whether the original game was rigged. We'll get to that later, because the next step is asking, what happens when the stories, the school, and even the chocolate frog cards all agree Dumbledore was right all along? So if the whole wizarding world is busy agreeing Dumbledore was right all along, what happens to the people he broke on the way there? Let's start with the easiest one to polish up for public consumption, Severus Snape. After the war, Snape gets a portrait in the headmaster's office. Full honors, official recognition. He's remembered as the man who died for the cause, which, if you've been paying attention, is a very neat, very tidy way of saying, this guy's entire life was chewed up by our beloved headmaster's master plan. It sounds noble. It also sounds suspiciously like PR copy. The public story is simple enough for a chocolate frog card. Snape loved Lily. He regretted joining Voldemort. Dumbledore, in his infinite wisdom, gave him a second chance, and Snape bravely became a double agent, risking his life every day until he died to bring Voldemort down. Beautiful, tragic, perfectly merchandisable. But if you're wondering where the part is where Dumbledore corners a sobbing young man on a hilltop and basically says, "You caused the woman you love to be targeted. You will now work for me forever, or watch her child die." That bit doesn't make the statue inscription. Apparently that's too long to fit on a plaque. Snape wasn't just inspired into heroism, he was coerced, boxed in, and emotionally blackmailed. Dumbledore weaponized his grief, his guilt, and his isolation, then kept tightening the screws. Spy here, lie there, kill me on schedule, protect the boy you resent, die at the right moment so the Elder Wand math works out. That's not mentorship. That's management. And what about classroom Snape? The man who terrorized Neville, humiliated Hermione, and made every non-Slytherin feel like a walking target. After the war, that gets sanded down into tragic flaws and a harsh exterior that hid a brave heart. Look, nobody was surprised he was a disaster as a teacher, but instead of asking why a clearly traumatized Death Eater was left in charge of children for decades, the narrative quietly reframes it as part of his brooding, Byronic charm arc. Yeah, take a moment. Because once you turn Snape into a romantic anti-hero, Dumbledore's role magically upgrades too. He's no longer the boss who knowingly left a damaged man in an impossible, soul-destroying role. He's the wise leader who saw the good in him, nurtured his better nature, and tragically had to ask so much of him for the greater good. That phrasing sound familiar? For now, let's celebrate how convenient this is for Dumbledore's legacy. Snape's sanitized statue doesn't show the strings. It just proves, on loop, that Dumbledore was right to trust his own judgment about people, no matter what it cost them. Even dead, Snape is still doing a job for him, standing there in oil paint, silently testifying that the system worked. But what happens when the monuments and the memories start doing that for everyone Dumbledore used? And what happens when the story runs out of statues and starts dealing with souls? Let's start with the most disturbing image in the entire series, that flayed, gasping baby Voldemort thing under the bench at King's Cross. Yeah, take a moment. That's not just spooky set design. That's what's left of Tom Riddle after a lifetime of Horcruxes, murder, and magical self-harm. A soul so shredded it can't stand up, can't move on, can't even be comforted. It just lies there, whimpering, while Harry and Dumbledore have a calm little chat about destiny. Dumbledore looks at that supernatural misery and basically says, "He cannot be helped." Not, "I don't know how." Not, "We should try." Just, sentence delivered. If you're wondering how we got here, remember Dumbledore's whole strategy. He doesn't just stop Voldemort. He lets him keep going. He watches Tom Riddle turn into Lord Voldemort, watches him experiment with soul-splitting, and instead of shutting it down early, he starts taking notes. He lets Voldemort tear his soul again and again, because every Horcrux is one more guarantee that Voldemort will eventually collapse under the weight of his own damage. And then comes the final move. Dumbledore sets up Harry as a walking Horcrux trap, engineers the Elder Wand ownership trail, and makes sure Voldemort kills Harry at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way, so the Horcrux inside Harry dies, but Harry doesn't stay dead. That's not just victory. That's choreography. That's, "I am going to break your soul so completely that even death won't be an escape." Look, nobody was surprised that Voldemort ended up punished. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. But look at who's standing there in the afterlife, calmly narrating the terms. Albus Dumbledore. The same man who once sat with Grindelwald and drew up blueprints for ruling the wizarding world for the greater good, now presides in limbo over the wreckage of his old enemy, almost like a judge watching a sentence being carried out. Pattern interrupt. Why is Dumbledore even there? Harry's near-death brain could have conjured his parents, Sirius, Lupin, literally anyone. Instead, he gets the headmaster who lied to him for 7 books, sitting in pristine robes, acting as moral arbiter of who deserves what fate after death, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly the kind of power Dumbledore claimed to fear in himself. So is this justice? Cosmic balance finally catching up with a mass murderer? Or is it Dumbledore needing to control every last variable, right down to Voldemort's eternal suffering? For now, let's celebrate that the war is over, but keep that image of the crying soul under the bench and the old man watching it. Because the real question is, if Dumbledore can script Voldemort's afterlife, what else did he quietly script for everyone else? If Dumbledore can micromanage Voldemort's eternity, what do you think he was doing with Harry's childhood? Let's start with one of the quietest, ugliest receipts in the whole series. The Dursleys getting a ministry escort and a free pass. Remember that Deathly Hallows evacuation at Privet Drive. Moody, Daedalus Diggle, the whole dramatic farewell. The Order shows up like a magical moving company, hustles the Dursleys out under protection, and we get that almost moment. Dudley shuffling forward, saying he doesn't think Harry is a waste of space. Petunia frozen in the doorway. Vernon grunting in the background like a malfunctioning walrus. It's awkward. It's tiny. It's kind of sweet for Dudley. And then it's gone. No real apology. No. Hey, sorry we starved you and locked you in a cupboard for a decade. Yeah. Take a moment. If you're wondering where the consequences are, you're not alone. Petunia and Vernon never face anything. No Muggle investigation, because nobody ever tells the Muggle authorities what happened. No wizarding consequences, because Dumbledore never reports it, never documents it, never even warns the Order. By the way, Harry's guardians are emotionally and physically abusive. Maybe keep an eye on that. The wizarding world swoops in to shield these people from Voldemort, but not from accountability. And that's not an accident. That's design. Dumbledore knew Harry's life at Privet Drive was miserable. He literally tells the Dursleys in Half-Blood Prince that they've failed in raising him, which, if you've been paying attention, is the most underpowered call-out in history. This is the same man who can rearrange a ministry trial with a well-timed Phoenix entrance, and the best he does for Harry is a disappointed headmaster speech in the living room. Then look at Harry after the war. Shaped by years of Dumbledore's forgive, understand, move on philosophy, he doesn't push for justice. He ends up on Christmas card terms with Dudley, which is honestly growth for both of them, but he never really confronts Petunia and Vernon. No serious conversation. No, you hurt me. The trauma just sits there, quietly dictating his boundaries, while he pours all his energy into being a better dad than James and a better guardian than the Dursleys ever were. That's the pattern. Dumbledore uses Muggle spaces and people as tools. Blood wards on a suburban house, an orphanage for Tom Riddle, a cupboard under the stairs for Harry. He'll weaponize Muggle misery when it suits the plan, but he never builds any actual bridge between worlds to protect magical kids stuck in those places. No liaison office, no child welfare charms, no protocol for, hey, if we dump a chosen one with bigots, maybe we should check in. And after the war, nothing changes structurally. The blood wards are gone. The prophecy is fulfilled. The weapon survived. Mission accomplished. But Dumbledore's system, the one that allowed a boy in the cupboard to be a valid security strategy, never gets dismantled. Which means the real horror isn't just what Harry lived through. It's that somewhere out there, the next magical kid in a hostile Muggle home is still completely unprotected by the world Dumbledore shaped. So if Harry was the perfect test case, the question becomes, what did Dumbledore's successors actually do with that lesson? And what did they choose to ignore? If you zoom out from Harry's trauma for a second, you hit the big, uncomfortable question. Did the wizarding world actually learn anything, or just swap logos on the propaganda posters? Let's start with the sales pitch of the war. Voldemort runs on pure blood supremacy, Muggle-borns as thieves, Muggles as livestock. Dumbledore counters with the Order of the Phoenix, half-bloods, Muggle-borns, werewolves, house elf sympathizers, the whole misfit Avengers lineup. Ideologically, it's open doors versus magical eugenics. And after the war, you do see that in policy. Kingsley's ministry cracks down on blood-based laws, Muggle-borns stop getting hauled in for wand theft, and people like Hermione end up writing actual protections instead of just inspirational posters. So on paper, progress. Real, measurable, overdue. For now, let's celebrate. But if you've been paying attention, the deeper structure barely twitches. The Malfoys lose social clout, sure, but they're still in the manor. Pure-blood dynasties that bankrolled bigotry for centuries keep their vaults, their land, their influence. Nobody talks about reparations. Nobody talks about dismantling the old family's grip on the Wizengamot. Death Eater ideology is discredited, but Death Eater money? Apparently, that's fine. It's like the wizarding world said, no more fascism, but we're keeping the inheritance. And then there's Hogwarts, the place that literally manufactures the next generation of this society. After 2 wars fueled by blood and house prejudice, what structural change do we see? The house system stays. The banners go back up. Slytherin, the house that produced Voldemort, most Death Eaters, and about 3 friendly faces, keeps its branding as ambitious, slightly evil, don't leave your drink unattended. McGonagall is fair, the staff are better, but the social script doesn't reset. You're still sorted at 11 into identity tribes that come preloaded with stereotypes. Gryffindors are brave, Ravenclaws are smart, Hufflepuffs are nice, and Slytherins are complicated. Yeah, take a moment. This is the same world that just watched an entire genocidal movement grow out of that exact stereotype stew, and the response is basically, house points anyone? Here's where Dumbledore's strategy looks way smaller than his reputation. His long game is obsessively focused on beating one Dark Lord. Every manipulation of Harry, every secret with Snape, every chess move with the Elder Wand is about Voldemort. 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 What he never seriously targets is the class and blood hierarchy that made Tom Riddle's message land in the first place. He protects Muggle-borns from being murdered, but he doesn't build a world where they're not quietly second class. So the world Dumbledore leaves behind isn't healed. It's stabilized just enough. The extremists are gone. The worst laws are repealed. The PR is better. But the wealth, the houses, the quiet snobbery? Still there, waiting. Which means if another charismatic manipulator ever decides to play the long game Dumbledore did, just with a different brand of change the world speech, the system is already prepped for them. And if you're wondering who might be perfectly positioned to steer that future, we'll get to that later. And if you're wondering who might be perfectly positioned to steer that future, we'll get to that later. Because first, we have to talk about the cursed fanfiction that somehow became canon, the cursed child. Let's start with the basics. Years after the war, the Ministry is secretly holding a brand new prototype time turner, not the old be 5 minutes late to arithmancy model. This one can send you way back. Albus Severus Potter teams up with Scorpius Malfoy, decides time is a suggestion, and starts hopping around trying to save Cedric Diggory. Result? Alternate timelines where Voldemort wins, Snape lives, Ron and Hermione never get together, and the wizarding world speedruns every bad ending route. Look, nobody was surprised the time turner mess came back. The Ministry destroyed them all after Order of the Phoenix, and then apparently didn't, or rebuilt one in secret. Because, of course, the institution trained for decades under Dumbledore's quiet approval of secret weapons and rule-bending would go, what if we had one more dangerous, reality-breaking device in a locked drawer? That's not a plot twist. That's brand consistency. This is Dumbledore's culture, still humming along. The idea that the right people, in the right room, with the right last name, should have access to world-altering magic. No transparency, no public debate. Just, trust us, we're the good guys. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly how Dumbledore ran Hogwarts, the Order, and pretty much Harry's entire childhood. And then there's Albus Severus. The poor kid is literally named after Albus Dumbledore and Severus Snape, two men whose entire public image is a curated narrative job. Harry buys into the bravest man I ever knew line, hangs Snape's portrait, forgives Dumbledore's sins, and then brands his child with that mythology for life. Albus grows up in the shadow of legends he doesn't actually know, expected to feel honored by legacies built on secrets, half-truths, and carefully edited war stories. Yeah. Take a moment. You see it in how messed up he gets. He doesn't feel like Harry's son. He feels like a museum exhibit. Here stands the heir of sacrificial lamb and chess master-in-chief. His rebellion isn't just teenage angst. It's what happens when you realize your whole identity was assigned by people who worshipped Dumbledore's version of events and never asked if that was healthy. And every alternate timeline they create, still chained to Dumbledore's era. Cedric lives and becomes a Death Eater. The war goes differently. Voldemort wins or loses based on tiny ripples around events Dumbledore orchestrated or allowed. The butterfly effect is basically just, what if Dumbledore's carefully balanced domino tower fell in a different direction? Even in a bad stage script, the story literally cannot imagine a future that isn't orbiting his decisions. For now, let's celebrate one thing. Even when the writing goes off the rails, It accidentally proves the point. Decades after his death, the normal wizarding world is still defined by Dumbledore's secrets, his tools, his mythology. And the person best positioned to use that mythology for a new kind of control, we've actually already met them, just not in the way you think. So let's actually stop and do the ethics check, because if you're wondering, wait, was Dumbledore just a necessary monster? This is where it gets uncomfortable. Let's start with the pro-Dumbledore case. Without his insane, decades-long chess game, Voldemort probably wins. Dumbledore is the one who identifies the prophecy, hides it, and builds an order around it. He's the only person Voldemort ever really feared. He cracks the Horcrux mystery when everyone else is still treating Tom Riddle like a spooky campfire story. He engineers the Elder Wand Trail so that by the time Voldemort grabs it, it's basically a cursed USB stick. From a war logic perspective, his secrecy and sacrifices save thousands. You can argue he does what wartime leaders always do in dark fantasy and, actual history. He lies. He withholds. He sends kids into danger. Because if Harry doesn't walk into that forest at the exact right moment, with the exact right understanding of death, the wizarding world is cooked. In that reading, Dumbledore is the grim grown-up in the room, making brutal choices so other people's children get to live. But here's the bill. A childhood of abuse for Harry that Dumbledore knew about. He leaves the chosen one in a cupboard, with a family he personally watched bully Petunia for being abnormal, while he has access to literally an entire magical community, blood wards or not. Snape, life of non-stop torment, forced to cosplay as a Death Eater for decades, then ordered to kill the only man who ever trusted him, and walk straight toward his own planned death so the wand math works out. Student casualties at Hogwarts because the school is allowed to become a war zone twice. And after all that, the system Dumbledore protected still runs on secrets, blood prejudice, and unregulated murder sticks. Pattern interrupt. Did he ever seriously try anything else? Where's the version of Dumbledore who calls a global convention of magical governments? Who actually tells McGonagall, hey, here's the full prophecy. Here's our Horcrux theory. Let's build a real coalition. Where's the headmaster who uses his massive moral authority to push for structural reforms instead of just trolling Fudge at dinner parties? Which, if you've been paying attention, he never does. He defaults to manipulation, to half-truths, to only I can carry this burden, because that's his comfort zone and his fear-talking. So we end up with a really messy answer. Dumbledore might be both things at once, the man who stopped a genocidal Dark Lord and the man who caused immense harm along the way. Harry lives, Voldemort dies, but the victims of Dumbledore's methods don't magically disappear just because the statue in the Ministry looks heroic. The real question is yours. At what point does "for the greater good" become indistinguishable from villainy, especially when you're the one defining what the greater good is? And if that sounds familiar, yeah. Take a moment. Because the next person who picks up that logic, we've already seen what they can do with it. So let's bring this right to the person who actually decides what all of this means. Harry. Because once you admit Dumbledore's logic looks a little Voldemort-flavored, the next question is brutal. Why does Harry forgive him? Let's start with where Harry is emotionally after the truth drop from Rita's book and Aberforth's rant. He's not mildly disappointed. He is shattered. This is the guy who literally walked out of a tent in the middle of a war because he couldn't handle one more Dumbledore secret. Angry, humiliated, feeling like a weapon that didn't even get full instructions. And then? King's Cross. That scene is the reset button. The soft lighting, the comforting old man voice, baby Voldemort squealing under a bench like someone's cursed kidney stone. Dumbledore gives him the full tragic backstory, admits he wanted power, cries a little about Ariana, and Harry does what Harry always does. He empathizes. The rage that's been building for 7 books pivots into understanding in, 10 pages. Yeah, take a moment. Because from that point on, Harry is the choke point for the entire Dumbledore narrative. If you're wondering who actually controls the post-war story, it's not Rita Skeeter. It's the kid who survived. Harry decides what he tells the Ministry about the Hallows. He decides how much of Dumbledore's raised-you-to-die plan becomes public. He decides whether Rita gets more material or just a disappointed stare and a slammed door. Look, nobody was surprised that the wizarding world chose the comforting version, but they could only choose it because Harry handed it to them. In public, in interviews, in whatever speeches he gives at ministry events or Hogwarts memorials, he doesn't drag Dumbledore. He doesn't stand up and say, "By the way, my childhood was a state-sanctioned torture experiment, so this guy could run a long con on a fascist snake man." And here's the uncomfortable part. Harry needs to forgive him. Because if Dumbledore was wrong, if the plan wasn't necessary, then Harry's entire life becomes senseless cruelty instead of noble sacrifice. The cupboard under the stairs, the Triwizard nightmare, being a walking Horcrux, all of it stops being part of a meaningful, heroic arc and turns into one old man's catastrophic failure. That's a level of meaninglessness Harry cannot live with. So he retrofits purpose onto pain and defends the architect. Fast forward to the epilogue. Albus Severus, the name that launched 1,000 discourse threads. Harry doesn't just privately make peace. He brands his kid with a Dumbledore Snape redemption thesis and sends him on to Platform 9 3/4 as a walking PR campaign. That's a signal to the entire wizarding world about how they're supposed to remember these men, which, if you've been paying attention, is the final twist of the knife. Dumbledore's last and most effective accomplice is the boy he raised to die, who then lives, and validates the story. The victim becomes the alibi, and the next generation grows up on the cleaned-up legend. And if you think that legend doesn't shape who picks up Dumbledore's playbook next, we'll get to that later. So let's slam the brakes for a second and do the one thing Dumbledore never did. Tell the truth. Imagine year 1, same Hogwarts letters, same terrified 11-year-old in an oversized jumper, but Dumbledore actually sits Harry down in his office. No twinkly-eyed riddles, no all in good time, just age-appropriate honesty. You survived a dark wizard. He's not gone, just broken. There's a prophecy that might involve you. You're protected here and at your aunt's because of very old magic I'm maintaining. Is that scary? Yeah, take a moment. But it's a clean fear, not the shapeless panic of, everyone's lying to me and I don't know why. Harry could have walked into Hogwarts knowing he wasn't a freak accident, but a kid in a dangerous story with adults who were actually leveling with him. Now zoom out. Picture a Hogwarts where Dumbledore publicly clears Sirius Black the second he hears the Shrieking Shack story. Let's start with a basic press conference. Hey, the Ministry jailed the wrong guy. My bad for not screaming about it sooner. He's an Order member. Leave the man alone. Then he uses that clout to help Kingsley clean house on the Board of Governors, instead of letting Lucius Malfoy treat Hogwarts like his personal haunted country club. In that world, cursed diaries don't just wander into the castle. The Chamber of Secrets incident triggers an actual safety overhaul, not just a shrug and another school year. Triwizard Tournament? Banned. Forever, because the last time it ran, a student died. And if you're wondering, that should have been the end of the "let's throw children at dragons for fun" era. Hogwarts becomes a school first, trauma theme park second. Now go even bigger. Imagine a ministry where Dumbledore doesn't keep the war inside the wizarding bubble like it's his private chessboard. He walks into the Prime Minister's office and says, "Hi, magic is real. Fascist Snake Man is back, and your nukes won't help, but your intel might." Joint task forces. Muggle and magical governments actually coordinating instead of pretending each other don't exist while people die on both sides. Harry in that timeline? Completely different kid. He's still brave, still reckless, still flying into danger on a broom that really should have come with a therapist. But he has language for what's happening to him. He knows about Horcruxes before he's hunting them. He knows what the Hallows are before a children's story nearly derails the mission. He's treated as a partner, not a mushroom kept in the dark and fed nonsense. And here's the snap back to canon. Dumbledore could have chosen any of those options. He had the power, the knowledge, and the influence. He didn't. Which, if you've been paying attention, tells you everything. He valued control over collaboration, mystery over consent, and a perfectly arranged endgame over the messy shared work of actually changing the wizarding world. For now, let's celebrate that we can see the alternate paths, because the next question is brutal. Who ends up walking the one he actually paved? So who actually walks that path? Let's start with the obvious red herring, Voldemort. Voldemort's ambitions are caveman-level villainy, domination, immortality. Everyone's screaming when he walks into a room. It's big, loud, and honestly kind of basic. He wants to rule the wizarding world like a kid grabbing all the toys and then biting anyone who comes near the box. Dumbledore? He's not trying to own the box. He's trying to write the rulebook for the game being played around it. Control of the story itself. That's the real prize. Look at where he stands. Every narrative choke point? Dumbledore is already there, quietly taking attendance. The prophecy? He's the one who hears it, filters it, decides who needs to know. Tom Riddle's education? Dumbledore is the professor who clocks, "This child is one diary away from supervillain," and still lets him into Hogwarts, still keeps him close, still studies him like a long-term experiment. Harry's upbringing? He chooses the Dursleys, knowing they're awful, because the Blood Wards fit the story he wants. A humble, unloved hero who won't be tempted by glory. If you're wondering why literally nobody thought, maybe the boy who lived shouldn't sleep in a cupboard, it's because the one man who could fix it was busy arranging the plot. Fast forward. The Order of the Phoenix? He leads it. Hogwarts? He runs it. Moral opposition to the Ministry? That's basically just Dumbledore's army, sponsored by Dumbledore. Even when he's disgraced, removed, or out of power, everyone is still reacting to him. Fudge panics about him. Voldemort fears him. The Order orbits him. The Ministry frames itself as his rival, then, later, his redemption project. By the time we hit Deathly Hallows, everyone is locked into parts he outlined. Harry is the willing sacrifice, groomed from childhood to walk into the forest and die at the perfect narrative beat. Snape is the tragic spy, forced into a double life so miserable it makes Azkaban look like a wellness retreat. Voldemort is the doomed tyrant, unknowingly following the Elder Wand breadcrumb trail Dumbledore set up from Grindelwald to Draco to Harry. The Ministry gets to be the redeemed institution after the war, cleaning up the mess and pretending they were totally on the right side in the end. Yeah, take a moment, and through all of this, Dumbledore's greatest fear, his lust for power, never actually disappears. He just gets clever with it. No Minister for Magic title. No Dark Lord aesthetic. He trades visible authority for invisible authorship. He doesn't seize the throne. He casts the people who sit on it. So here's the ugly definition. If villainy is using people as tools without their informed consent, Dumbledore's halo starts to look less like a symbol of purity and more like a crown of thorns he quietly jammed onto everyone else's heads. Because if he wrote the story, what happens when the story goes off script? So what do you actually do with a Dumbledore who might be the quiet, final boss? You don't throw your books out. You reread them. You put the halo down and pick the magnifying glass up. Let's start with the big fear a lot of fans have, that calling Dumbledore morally gray, or even a little bit villain-coded, ruins the magic. It doesn't. It upgrades it. The series you loved at 11 still works. But when you come back at 25 or 35, after jobs and rent and real-world institutions, this darker lens lets the story grow up with you. Suddenly, Harry isn't just the chosen one. He's a kid being moved across a chessboard by a man who knew about the Dursleys' abuse and left him there anyway because it fit the Blood Ward plan. The Mirror of Erised stops being only a sweet, sad scene about longing and becomes your first glimpse of Dumbledore studying Harry's desires like data. He watches which wish the weapon will choose, and Harry's choices get heavier. When he walks into the forest in Deathly Hallows, you can read that as pure, unfiltered courage, or, with this theory, as courage shaped by years of curated information. Dumbledore withholds the full truth about Horcruxes, about the Hallows, about the exact terms of Harry's survival, until Harry is so locked into the narrative that stepping off the path barely feels possible. Same action, deeper tragedy. Snape, too, becomes way more than the greasy bat who couldn't let go of high school drama. Under this lens, he's Dumbledore's most expendable piece. A man guilt-trapped for life, forced into a double existence that was always going to end with Dumbledore calmly scheduling his death on the astronomy tower. That "Severus, just please" moment? Yeah, take a moment. It plays very differently if you hear it as, "Time for you to die on cue so my wand plan works." Even Voldemort gets an upgrade. Tom Riddle isn't just evil baby Hitler with a wand. He's a kid. Dumbledore clocked early as dangerous, then kept at arm's length, visiting the orphanage once a year like a social worker with a bad conscience. The boy who learns that power and charisma get him everything, from the man who once plotted wizard supremacy with Grindelwald. That's not absolution. It's context. It makes the whole wizarding world feel like a pressure cooker that two gifted boys, Riddle and Harry, got thrown into from opposite sides. And this isn't even fanon rebellion. It actually lines up with Rowling's own favorite toys: power, institutions, and how badly things go when everyone trusts the twinkly-eyed headmaster, the ministry, the prophet, or later, Kingsley's reformed government a little too blindly. The books are already screaming, "Stop worshipping charismatic leaders," which, if you've been paying attention, kind of includes Dumbledore himself. Revisiting key scenes with this in mind is like watching a director's cut where someone turned the commentary track on. The prophecy reveal in Order of the Phoenix stops being a clumsy info dump and becomes Dumbledore finally admitting that he's been editing Harry's life like a script. King's Cross? Maybe that's not just comfort. Maybe it's one last sales pitch. Walk back out there and finish my design. Even the Elder Wand trail, from Grindelwald to Draco to Harry, suddenly looks less like fate and more like a logistics spreadsheet Dumbledore filled out in advance. For now, let's celebrate what that does for you as a reader. It gives you permission to question every adult, every institution, every for the greater good. Speech in the series. It turns Hogwarts from a cozy backdrop into a case study in how systems keep running even when the people in charge are deeply compromised. And once you've seen that, it's really hard not to start side-eyeing real-world authority figures who ask entire generations to suffer for some vague future safety. Because if Dumbledore can turn a child's life into a war strategy and still get a chocolate frog card, what does that say about the stories our own leaders tell, the statues they build, and the things they quietly decide we don't need to know? And if the boy who lived had to learn to see past the legend, what are we still refusing to look at? If you're wondering how far this rabbit hole goes, don't worry. We're not done pulling on Dumbledore's threads yet. So, if you're wondering how far the rabbit hole goes, let's start with a lightning round recap of just how many strings Dumbledore was actually pulling. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. First move. The Dursleys. He dumps a 1-year-old celebrity on the doorstep of the most magic-hating Muggles in Britain, fully aware they're awful, and calls it for the greater good, because blood wards are convenient. Then he strolls into Tom Riddle's orphanage, spots a traumatized kid hoarding trophies and hanging rabbits, and instead of getting him therapy, offers him a castle and a wand. Hogwarts as rehab? Not exactly. Hogwarts as grooming ground. From there, it's the stone test, which, if you've been paying attention, looks a lot like a kid-sized obstacle course designed to measure Harry's loyalty. The Chamber of Secrets? He lets an entire school year play out with a basilisk in the walls and a diary Horcrux on the loose, never explains what a Horcrux even is, and just watches. The Prophecy? He frames Harry's entire identity around one sentence, never mentions that neither can live, doesn't legally obligate anyone to die, and lets that belief steer every choice. Then comes the tournament. Harry's name pops out. Every adult could say, "Nope, he's 14." And Dumbledore goes, "Rules are rules." Emotional neglect? Constant. He withholds the truth about Sirius, about his own past, about the Hallows, and about the fact that Voldemort literally can't be killed until Harry walks willingly to his own death. The Horcrux hunt is basically a lethal internship. He drags Harry into the cave, drinks cursed zombie juice, and leaves a half-explained scavenger hunt that gets multiple people killed. All while running the Elder Wand plot in the background, losing it to Draco on purpose, betting the entire wizarding world that the wand's loyalty math will eventually spit out Harry at the right moment. Snape? Coerced into lifelong service with Lily's memory as a leash, forced to be hated by children, then scheduled to die on cue to keep Dumbledore's own secrets buried and the wand trail clean. The Hallows? Misdirection. He preaches against them while quietly owning one and obsessing over another. The Forest Walk? He sets Harry up to die, then in King's Cross calmly justifies every lie like it was all an ethics seminar. After the war, the control doesn't stop. Kingsley's Ministry, McGonagall's Hogwarts, Harry the Auror, Hermione the Minister, all operating in a world built on Dumbledore's version of events. Snape's legacy gets sanitized. Voldemort's soul ends up in eternal limbo. The Dursleys never face real reckoning. Blood prejudice lingers, and Cursed Child literally shows the timeline snapping the second people try to change the story he left behind. Look, nobody was surprised Voldemort tried to own the world. Dumbledore ended up owning the narrative. Voldemort tried to rule everyone. Dumbledore settled for ruling what everyone remembers, and that might be scarier. Yeah, take a moment. So, after all of that, where do you land? When you look at the full chessboard, is Albus Dumbledore a tragic hero who did awful things for a good cause, a necessary monster playing 12D wizard chess, or the secret big bad who just wore better robes and had better PR? Let's start with the easy mode take, Lawful Good Grandpa. This is the version where you see the twinkly eyes, the lemon drops, the bad knitting patterns, and you say, look, he made mistakes, but he loved those kids. He stopped Voldemort, and he literally died to save the wizarding world. If you're in this camp, you probably read the King's Cross chapter and went, yeah, he messed up, but he owned it, and closed the book. Feeling mostly okay. Then you've got Chaotic Good Manipulator. This is the crowd that goes, yes, he left Harry with the Dursleys. Yes, he raised a child soldier. Yes, he turned Snape into an emotionally destroyed double agent. But the alternative was Voldemort winning. You see him as the guy who will absolutely push a teenager toward a forest death march, but only because he's calculated every path, and that's the one where more people live. Terrifying? Yes, but also effective. And finally, the spicy take, Greater Good Villain. This is where you look at the orphanage visits with Tom Riddle, the way he withholds the Horcrux truth, the Elder Wand ownership trail he scripts from Grindelwald to Draco, to Harry, and you go, wait. This man didn't just fight Voldemort. He created the conditions for Voldemort, then curated the story where only he and his chosen boy could fix it. That's not just leadership. That's narrative domination. So which verdict are you? Drop it in the comments, exactly like a Hogwarts house quiz you didn't ask for. Lawful Good Grandpa, Chaotic Good Manipulator, or Greater Good Villain. And if you're somewhere in the cursed middle, feel free to invent your own. Beloved Disaster Headmaster is right there. Now for homework. I want your favorite Dumbledore was sus here moments we didn't cover. Is it him calmly sending Harry back to the Dursleys every summer while apparently knowing they were the human equivalent of unseasoned toast and emotional damage? Is it the way he lets Snape rot in a double life for years, then schedules his murder like it's a Tuesday meeting? Is it that quiet little decision to leave Harry in the dark about being a Horcrux until the last possible second? Drop your receipts. Quote the chapter. Name the movie scene. Turn the comments into a full-on evidence board, red string and all, because together you're going to decide how dark this story actually reads. And it's okay if you completely disagree with this whole theory. You're allowed to love Dumbledore, hate this interpretation, or sit in that messy space where you cry at his death and still side-eye half his decisions. Just keep it respectful. Argue like you're in the Great Hall, not a YouTube swamp. If you're wondering where we go from here, your answers are going to decide it. Do we put Snape's ethics on trial? Do we break down Voldemort's psychology? Or do we run a full Dumbledore defense video and see if he actually walks? Keep watching, because the next piece of this puzzle might change which side you're on. Keep watching, because the next piece of this puzzle might change which side you're on. And look, if you've made it all the way through, Dumbledore was the real villain without needing a butterbeer IV drip or an emotional support chocolate frog. I'm a little concerned for you. Yeah, take a moment. You just refiled one of the most beloved characters in the wizarding world from whimsical grandpa to smiling chess master who weaponized child neglect. Let's start with what you're walking away with. You're not just going, huh, Dumbledore was kinda sketchy. You've got a whole new lens on the series. The baby on the doorstep isn't just tragic anymore. It's a calculated move from a man who knew exactly how the Dursleys treated him and did it anyway because it fit the plan. The Hallows subplot? Not quirky side quest. It's Dumbledore quietly curating the Elder Wand's ownership trail like a cursed investment portfolio. After this, Post-Deathly Hallows doesn't feel like a golden epilogue. It feels like uneasy peace. A world Kingsley and Hermione are desperately patching together while standing on foundations Dumbledore poured out of secrets, half-truths, and propaganda. Harry, the boy who lived, ends up the man who has to keep living with the knowledge that his entire childhood was somebody else's long con, which, if you've been paying attention, makes that quiet platform scene a lot less awe and a lot more, "Are we okay?" If you're wondering what we do on this channel, it's basically this: long-form, lore-obsessed breakdowns where we take the comforting story you thought you knew, turn it inside out, and then crack jokes about it while your childhood cries in the corner. We go heavy on the analysis, we keep the humor sharp, and we treat canon like a crime scene wall covered in red string. So if you want more of that mix of unhinged theory crafting and actual textual receipts, hit subscribe, ring the little bell, and stay in this rabbit hole with us. For now, let's celebrate that you survived the Dumbledore discourse without throwing your copy of Deathly Hallows out the window. Next up, you've got options, and they are all morally questionable. If you want to stay in the "every adult failed this child" pipeline, click on our "Snape was never redeemed" breakdown, where we put his ethics on trial and ask if one tragic backstory can really cancel a career of terrorizing 11-year-olds. Or, if you want to zoom out, jump to "How the Ministry Doomed the Wizarding World," where we track how the same corrupt system Dumbledore gamed ended up making Voldemort possible in the first place. Either way, don't stop here. Dumbledore might have controlled the narrative inside the books, but you control what you watch next. Remember, in the wizarding world, the wand chooses the wizard. But the story was always Dumbledore's. Until now.